Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to prohibit the import of products made by forced labour in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, to require all companies importing products from Xinjiang to the UK to provide proof that the manufacture of those products has not involved forced labour and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, this 10-minute rule bill has two simple aims that are already deeply enshrined in our international human rights obligations that we now wish to implement. One is to prohibit the import of products made by forced labour in the Xinjiang region. The second is to require all companies importing products from Xinjiang to the UK to provide proof that the manufacture of those products has not involved forced labour. I do not believe for a moment that this is in any way controversial, or is it something that the people of the United Kingdom would object to. Indeed, I am convinced that the people across these islands would want to know that what they pick up in their local supermarket or hardware store or purchase from an online retailer hasn't been made by slave labour. In 2021, in its annual report on people trafficking, the US State Department reported, "In Xinjiang, the government is a trafficker. Authorities use threats of physical violence, forcible drug-taking, physical and sexual abuse and torture to force detainees to work in adjacent or off-site factories or work sites producing garments, footwear, carpets, yarn, food products, holiday decorations, building materials, extractives, materials for solar power equipment, other renewable energy components, consumer electronics, bedding, hair products, cleaning supplies, personal protective equipment, face masks, chemicals, pharmaceuticals and other goods. And these goods are finding their way into businesses and homes around the world." And that was why in December 2021, President Biden signed into law an act which was passed through Congress with support from both sides of the aisle that would ensure that all goods, wares, articles, merchandise mined, produced or manufactured wholly or in part in Xinjiang could not enter the United States unless those businesses could prove that they were being imported had not been produced with forced labour. This legislation puts the United States way ahead of the rest of the international community in confronting China's abuse of the Uyghurs, because crucially it makes a presumption that goods coming from Xinjiang are made with forced labour, and businesses will have to prove that that is not the case before they can be brought in. The US legislation has received widespread support from human rights campaigners and the Uyghur diaspora, with Nuri Turkle, the US-educated Uyghur American lawyer and the Commissioner on International Religious Freedom, challenging those countries who are reluctant to follow the United States' lead by saying, "How else do you propose to get China to change without going after the most important thing to the Chinese government, which is their economic interests?" And he's absolutely right, because whether we like it or not, the only thing that will make the Chinese government change its behaviour is meaningful economic sanctions. And I think consumers here in the United Kingdom would welcome having the confidence that when they purchase goods that have been produced or imported from China, that they are not inadvertently being complicit in China's horrific human rights abuses. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2020, the UK Government said that it will continue to urge the Chinese authorities to change their approach in Xinjiang and respect international human rights norms, both bilaterally with China and the UN alongside our international partners. There is, however, no evidence whatsoever that that approach has worked. And it's clear that China hasn't paid the slightest heed to what the UK Government, or indeed anyone else, has had to say about their human rights record. So now, perhaps, with the United States increasing the pressure and leading the way with this new bill, it is time for the UK and others to follow. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Wednesday night, the Government tabled an amendment to the Health and Care Bill which recognised the very serious problem of products which have been produced as a result of slavery and human trafficking entering the supply chain in NHS procurement. It's been known for some time that billions of pounds worth of NHS medical equipment has been sourced in whole or in part from forced labour in Xinjiang. A fact recognised earlier this month by Lord Blencathra, when he said that despite widespread reports of forced labour in that region, our supply chain laws have failed to prevent such procurement. And it is an outrage that our healthcare workers have been forced to put on PPE equipment that originated in the forced labour camps of Xinjiang. Something had to be done about it, and I applaud the work done by the World Uyghur Council and the BMA for highlighting the scandal of PPE procurement, which resulted in Uyghur slave-made goods flooding the UK and the NHS in particular. And I welcome the Government's amendment, which recognises the scale of the problem and gives the Secretary of State the power to do something. But this is not, in and of itself, the answer, and cannot be seen as anything more than a welcome first step in tackling this issue. Because the wording of the actual amendment is very weak, as it merely gives the Secretary of State power to, by regulation, make provision that he thinks appropriate with a view to eradicating, in the use of the health service in England, goods or services that are tainted by slavery and human trafficking. That amendment should have been far more explicit and stated categorically that anything tainted by slavery or human trafficking will not be permitted to enter the supply chain of NHS procurement. And the onus for proving that it hasn't come from the forced labour camps should be on those importing that equipment. But it is a first step, and having formally recognised the problem that the NHS is being flooded by such goods and products, we must now work to ensure that all other sectors of our economy exclude products that are tainted by slavery or forced labour. And there is only one way of doing that, and that is through legislation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we'd all like to believe that slavery is something that's been consigned to the pages of history. Sadly, we know that's not the case, and this abhorrent practice is still widespread in parts of the world, including China, where many of the 1 to 2 million Uyghurs who have disappeared are now working under forced labour conditions. We also know that despite claiming to have ethical business models and to be champions of best practice in safeguarding human rights, there is credible evidence to suggest that many recognisable high street brands are complicit in using exploited Uyghur forced labour in their supply chains. And that means as consumers, we have no idea if the clothes we wear, the phones we carry, or a variety of everyday consumer goods we take for granted have been made in these forced labour camps before arriving on our high street. It's gone on for far too long, with companies and indeed entire countries turning a blind eye to modern slavery in the interest of continuing a supply of consumer goods and maximising commercial profit. It has to stop. And in the absence of a copper-bottomed commitment by the companies to make it stop, we will have to follow the lead of Congress and legislate to make it stop. Because if these companies are telling the truth, if they have nothing to hide, then they have nothing to fear from legislation such as this. Because whether we like it or not, the global economy is tainted by Uyghur slavery and forced labour, and China's treatment of the Uyghurs is a challenge for the world, and a test of just how robust the international community's commitment is to universal human rights when they come into conflict with multinational commercial interests. Because we cannot pretend that we do not know what's happening in Xinjiang. We can no longer be blissfully unaware that so much of what we consume is the product of slave labour, and we cannot kid ourselves on that we cannot do anything about it. Madam Deputy Speaker, loose arrangements, voluntary codes, finger-wagging, sage advice have, by and large, failed to stop companies and importers from being extremely lax in their attitude to weeding out anything that may have been manufactured or originated using slave labour. Similarly, harsh condemnation, desperate urging and passionate persuasion have all failed to shift China's policy one iota, and that's why the time has come for legislation. That's why this bill's time has come, and why only being part of that united front against modern-day slavery is going to get the companies to comply and to get China to change its ways. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Nusrat Ghani, Rushanara Ali, Patricia Gibson, Jim Shannon, Debbie Abrahams, Alistair Carmichael, Chris Law, Fiona Bruce, Patrick Grady, Liz Saville-Roberts, Siobhan McDonough and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Brendan O'Hara.
Import of products of forced labour from Xinjiang Prohibition Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 6th of May.
Friday the 6th of May. Thank you.